The carnivore diet is hands down the most powerful way to do a real dopamine detox. On the surface, eating only meat might seem like just another way to cut out junk and call it a dopamine detox, but what I find is that most people don't actually go down to the core. They don't dig into the real fundamental drivers behind why you're compelled to do anything in the first place. Much of the advice about resetting your brain's reward system focuses on surface level habits, things like putting down your phone or cutting out video games. But those fixes don't actually address what your body truly craves at its core. In fact, by only removing the surface level stimulation, you often make everything else harder to cut out by default. But what if there was a way to do the opposite? A way of doing this so that as long as you just dial in this one thing, cutting out everything else that you may want to include or remove in your dopamine detox becomes drastically easier by default. This is why we need to take it back to the first principles and look at our core drivers as human beings, which is also exactly what my Stoium Reset protocol is based on. At our core, our main drivers are to survive and reproduce. And at the very base of this core need, surviving, is food, at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So why does a dopamine detox on the carnivore diet work so well? The first thing you need to understand about dopamine is that most of it isn't released when you're doing the thing. It's released in the pursuit of it. Back when we were strictly living so that we could hunt for our next meal and didn't have any smartphones, processed foods, or video games, the drive to do what felt good was a massive advantage. The only things that really could give you those feel-good chemicals at the time were going to hunt for food that allows your body to thrive and reproduce. The main issue I see when people do a dopamine detox is that they will cut out most of the overstimulating things, but will keep things in like healthy fruit or carbohydrates. The thing is, all carbohydrates are broken down into sugar in the body, and on top of this, fructose found in fruit and most processed food is extremely addicting. This study found in rats sugar was even more addictive than cocaine. In fact, 94% of the rats chose the sweet taste of sugar over cocaine, even when they were already drug sensitized or addicted. So why does this matter for us? Because from an evolutionary perspective, humans weren't built in sugar-rich environments. For most of our history, sugar was extremely scarce, and when it did appear like ripe fruit or honey, it made perfect sense for our ancestors to binge on it. That drive increased our survival in the wild. The problem is, there was never a strong enough negative selection pressure to turn off that mechanism in our genes. In other words, our brains are still wired to crave sugar, but it's only if we get that initial taste of it. Imagine trying to quit 5 different drugs, but instead of cutting them all out, you keep dripping one of them in without even realizing it. That's what most people are doing when they keep these so-called healthy carbs in their diet. That slow drip keeps the addiction alive in the background. For most people, it's far easier and far more effective to just rip the band-aid off. After all, that's really the whole point of doing what most people refer to as a dopamine detox in the first place. And here's where the carnivore diet is different. You're not just removing bad inputs. Fundamentally, the carnivore diet induces a sense of psychological freedom by reducing decision fatigue. And on top of that, the neurochemical effects can drastically help with the recovery process from creating an intentional dopamine debt. After all, the carnivore diet is a ketogenic diet, and this 2025 study published in Frontiers in Nutrition, ketosis raises adenosine activity in the brain, and adenosine is like a natural brake that calms down overstimulated dopamine pathways, helping to reset the system. So not only is it the fact that you are removing garbage with something healthy, but the exact input that you are replacing the garbage with creates a metabolic state that literally forces your brain's reward circuits back to the way that they should be. To give you some context of how important this really is, let's look at not only how addicting these stimulant-like activities are, but just how addicting even just eating carbohydrates can be, especially in the context of a dopamine detox. Like I said earlier, the biggest misconception about a dopamine detox is treating all sources of stimulation as if they're the same. On the surface, that might sound like it makes sense, but on a deeper psychological level, they are drastically different. So why does cutting out carbohydrates matter so much in this context? Well, all carbs break down into glucose, aka sugar, in the body, and this directly impacts the brain's reward system. At a neurochemical level, sugar consumption can downregulate dopamine receptors, specifically the D2 receptors, which are critical for self-control and motivation. So what does this mean? Fewer available receptors. So you end up needing even more of the pleasurable stimulus just to get that same hit. If you decide to eat highly processed food, which are literally engineered by scientists to target your brain's reward centers as efficiently as possible, the downregulation is even more extreme. Not only are the modern healthy foods like fruit selectively bred to be as sugary as possible, but food engineering takes this to another level. Scientists deliberately combine sugar, fat, and salt to hit what they call the bliss point. That's the perfect ratio that lights up your brain, spikes dopamine, and overrides your body's normal hunger signals. Instead of feeling satisfied, you're left hungrier and craving more. And it doesn't just stop there. Additives like dextrose and other engineered chemicals take the effect even further. This is essentially hacking millions of years of evolution. For most of our history, these concentrated combinations simply just didn't exist. So what's more likely to win? Your willpower to just not eat so much, or millions of years of biology being hijacked by modern food scientists? And the key here is that much of what is driving the force behind food addiction is just eating carbohydrates in the first place. That slow drip that always keeps the addiction alive in the background. A common misconception about the carnivore diet is that it's only good for fat loss or these standard health reasons. But I actually think these psychological benefits are some of the most powerful. In 2021, Harvard surveyed over 2,000 people on a carnivore diet. And aside from the typical health improvements, the biggest reported changes were in mental clarity, focus, memory, and reduced food cravings. And those are the exact things that you'd expect to improve if your reward system was resetting. When cravings disappear, it's not willpower, it's your biology finally working in your favor. When clarity and focus come back, it's because your brain isn't constantly being overstimulated anymore. So why does the carnivore diet work so well for a dopamine detox? Well, it doesn't just cut out surface level habits, it fixes the problem at its very core. Dopamine is mostly released in the pursuit, which is why cravings pull you back even when the reward feels empty. And from a first principles standpoint, food has always been the deepest dopamine driver, as it is the core foundation of our survival. In the past, for most of human evolution, this mechanism and drive were very useful. It kept us alive and allowed us to thrive, but today it's been taken advantage of by modern selective breeding of plants and food scientists creating foods we have never had before to be as addicting as possible. Carnivore solves this by removing the junk completely and shifting your metabolism into a state that actually rewires your reward system back to where it should be. And if you want to know what kind of effects a 48-hour fast could have for this reset with the carnivore diet, check out this video right here.